This is the most reckless man I've ever seen. He didn't care about his friend who had aquaphobia struggling. He decisively jumped into the sea with him, but as soon as they touched the sea surface, the woman lost consciousness due to excessive fright. However, what's even more ridiculous is that all the crew members were at sea at this time, and there was nobody on the ship. They didn't even lower the lifeboat, and there wasn't a single ship around. They panicked and wanted to climb back, but their repeated failures made them more panicked. Soon, one of the hot girls was shivering with cold. In order to quickly get back to the ship, they took away the hot girl's inflatable toy and tried to climb up using it. However, the smooth surface made it impossible for them to climb up, and they even punctured the inflatable toy. The hot girl looked speechlessly at the deflated toy, and despair made her tremble even more. At this moment, they noticed that the flag on the ship was very close to the sea surface. So the man jumped up with all his strength, but only hit the edge and slipped. This time, he gathered strength and prepared to try again, gripping tightly without letting go. However, his heavy body caused the flag to tear, and he fell again. The men became furious with the repeated failures. Seeing that this wasn't working, they had to come up with another plan. The hot girl was frightened and shouted that there were sharks in the sea. Everyone's heart tightened. One of them quickly dived into the water to check, but found nothing unusual. After returning to the surface to calm everyone down, they gathered together to scare away unknown creatures. At this moment, little Emi suddenly remembered something. Her baby was still sleeping on the ship. They could only rely on the baby now. The hot girl was anxious, breathing rapidly. Someone next to her pulled her up and let her lie on the sea surface to make her feel better. Just the thought of possibly dying at sea made everyone's faces numb, their spirits dazed. By now, they had been stranded for over 5 hours. Suddenly, a phone rang in the distance. They desperately swam towards the sound, pulling down the clothes hanging down and taking out the phone from the pocket. They yelled into the phone for help, but everyone was so desperate to grab the phone that it accidentally fell into the water and short-circuited. The man got angry and threw the phone away. Everyone was shocked looking at her. Seeing that their hope was completely shattered, the hot girl became emotional and screamed loudly, which made everyone angry. She quickly closed her anus, and the scene immediately became chaotic. But soon she calmed down. If they didn't unite in this situation, there would be no way out. They discovered something in the distance. The yacht was rapidly approaching them. They screamed for help frantically, but the people on the yacht didn't know they were in trouble. Quickly, they left the area. Without time to panic and howl, they had to figure out a way themselves. They each took off their clothes, cut them into strips with a knife, and tied the clothes together. They planned to throw it on the ship and wrap it around a pole. However, they couldn't exert any force on the sea, and it only reached halfway before falling off. They adjusted their positions and prepared to try again. Success made their mood much better. The men took the lead and climbed up first. Although he was slow, his body weight made it difficult for the clothes to stay in place, and the clothes tore, falling back into the sea. At the propeller, the man tried to find a way out from there, but his hand slipped and the knife fell down. He hurriedly went down to chase after it and suddenly felt suffocated and uncomfortable. He swam frantically upwards and accidentally collided with the propeller, passing out. Little Emi, on the sea surface, realized that her husband was missing and hurriedly swam towards the stern. Coincidentally, her husband suddenly resurfaced, with blood flowing from his ears. It was even more difficult as his skull was slightly fractured. Another man swam over, took the knife from his hand, and couldn't bear the helplessness that overwhelmed him. He vigorously stabbed the ship's side to pry open the ladder. The ship owner certainly didn't allow him to damage his own ship and came forward to stop him. Unexpectedly, an accident happened. The man accidentally stabbed himself in the abdomen with the knife, and blood kept flowing out. He pulled out the knife, covered it with both hands to slow down the bleeding, but the blood still stained the seawater. Now they faced an even greater crisis. The smell of blood would attract more sharks. At this time, the baby on the ship woke up, and the sound of crying came from the speakers. Little Emi heard the crying and felt heartbroken, but what could she do? At this moment, the ship owner suddenly noticed that the hot girl was missing. He quickly dived down and found the hot girl sinking to the bottom. However, the ship owner didn't save her and returned alone to the surface. The feeling of suffocation had made him too weak to save her. Soon, the man with the knife lost too much blood and slowly showed no signs of life. The woman screamed heartbreakingly in agony and despair, and she no longer had the motivation to survive. At this time, little May's husband couldn't bear it any longer. Regardless of the pain from the fractured skull, he punched the ship owner in the face, shouting if the ship was more important than a friend's life. Little Emi hurriedly stepped forward to stop him, and her husband finally calmed down. They quickly returned to the woman's side and comforted her. The woman, after some struggle, pushed the body away in pain, but soon she regretted it and decided to swim back with the body. After bidding farewell to the remaining people, she swam alone towards a distant place. Now there are only 3 people left. Can they survive and leave? At this time, the ship owner felt guilty and decided to sink down to find the knife to make up for his mistakes. Soon it was late at night. Little Mi's husband's skull infection worsened, and blood began to flow from his nose. Gradually, he stopped breathing. It was unbearable for her to lose her husband. At this time, it started raining heavily. The ship owner emerged from the sea and drank some rainwater to quench his thirst. Then he continued to dive and search underwater. Soon, a storm swept over the sea. Little Emi knew that they couldn't waste any more time and reluctantly pushed the body to the sea surface. She had to survive. Not far away, the ship owner emerged from the sea again, exhausted. Little Emi quickly swam to his side and let him grab a life jacket. Then she struggled to swim towards the ship's body. To prevent being swept away by the waves, they firmly grasped the hook at the back of the ship, stabilizing themselves. The ship owner seemed to think of something through the diving mask, and he fiercely smashed the ship's frame, leaving only the lens. The sharp lens cut the ship owner's hand, serving as a substitute for the knife. There was no time to waste. He quickly swam to the side of the ship and forcefully inserted the lens into the spot stabbed by the knife. Then he called Little Emi over and asked her to climb on his body. Despite the rough sea, Little Emi couldn't hold on and fell back into the sea. Seeing the ship owner enduring the pain from the lens cutting his hand, Little Emi didn't want to give up. This time, she steadied herself and luckily grabbed the edge of the ship. But her hands were weak, and she fell again. The hope of survival was within reach, and Little Emi climbed onto the ship owner's body again. Finally, she grabbed onto the edge with both hands. Stepping on the ship owner's hand for leverage, she successfully returned to the ship, lying on the ship, gasping heavily. But there was no time to enjoy. She had to save the ship owner. She quickly pressed the lifeboat switch, and the lifeboat slowly opened from the side of the ship. However, an accident happened. Little Emi heard the baby crying again and left the ship owner to go to the cabin. When she opened the door, she found the baby facing the ground, lying on the floor. It was evident that the baby hadn't been taken care of and had suffered a lot. She held the baby in her arms, feeling heartbroken. Together, they fell asleep on the bed. Outside, the ship owner saw that Little Emi hadn't gone up the lifeboat. He knew it was his fault that caused the death of his companion, and he felt that he didn't have the face to continue living. He quietly swam to a distant place. Little Emi woke up and realized that something was wrong. She hurriedly went outside to look for the ship owner. There was nothing on the sea surface, except for the life jacket. She shouted the ship owner's name, and to her surprise, she saw the ship owner barely alive not far away. This scared her, and she quickly grabbed the life buoy and threw it to the ship owner. But there was still some distance between her and the ship owner. No matter how she shouted, the ship owner didn't respond. She had no choice but to take a deep breath and jump into the sea again. She swam with all her strength towards the ship owner, but when she reached his side, she found that the ship owner had already suffocated and died, sinking to the seabed. The next day, a fishing boat passed by this area and found no one on the ship. But when they saw the life buoy on the sea surface, the fishermen immediately realized that there had been a disaster. At this time, the baby's crying came from the ship. Little baby didn't know that she had once again lost her loved ones. Fortunately, she survived. Among the 6 people, only Little Emi survived.